Let me take you to a moment. It wasn't big, it wasn't tragic. There were no fireworks, no epiphanies. Just two people. Maybe you were one of them. Maybe you were in a train station, your hands sweating against a paper cup of coffee about to catch the 8:43 to somewhere. Or in a hospital room, or on a bench, or in a kitchen. And then it happened. You locked eyes with someone. Not like you were looking at them. No, it wasn't observation. It wasn't calculation. It wasn't flirtation. You weren't building a theory of their personality in real time like an algorithm with a soul. It was something else, something before words, something before thought, a moment of pure pulsing presence. And for a second, just a second, the world wasn't made of objects. The world wasn't made of data points or price tags or profile pictures or people who could do something for you. It was just you, and them, and that, the between. You didn't use each other. You didn't need anything from each other. You were together. That right there, that's Martin Buber's whole philosophy in a flash. No lecture, just two people being real in a world built to be fake. This week on The Observing Eye, we are going full speed into the life, work and soul of Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, mystic, translator and spiritual renegade who had the radical idea that reality doesn't live inside you. It doesn't live in the other person either. Reality happens in the relationship. That sacred flash when one person sees another not as a function, a utility, a means to an end, but as a thou. Not this person, not that object, but you, capital Y, second person singular, the most dangerous pronoun in the world. Buber cracked open the illusion that we're all separate little consciousnesses sealed in skulls, bouncing around like atoms in a gas chamber. He said the core of being isn't ego, it isn't knowledge, it isn't status. The core of being is encounter. I and Thou, he called it, his most famous book. A slim, devastating thing published in 1923. The kind of book you can read in an afternoon and spend the rest of your life trying to live. He wasn't trying to sell you a technique. He wasn't giving you a step-by-step guide to enlightenment. He wasn't telling you how to win friends or influence people. He was standing there with his beard and his heartbreak and his blazing Jewish soul saying, all real living is meeting. So what does that mean in 2025? What does it mean in a world where relationships are curated, where conversations are text bubbles, where a person can die surrounded by likes and still feel invisible? What does Martin Buber have to say to a generation raised on detachment, anxiety and the holy algorithm? Well, the funny answer is everything. Because Buber is not the I and thou guy with the long beard and the holy stare. He's not some fragile ghost drifting through the history of ideas. He's now. He's you when you stop pretending. He's the space between you and your partner when you stop trying to be right. He's the tremble in your hands when you hold your child and realize they are not your extension. He's the crack in the wall when the role you've been playing shatters and all that's left is a human being exposed. Today's episode is not just a biography. It is not a greatest hits rundown of Jewish mysticism and 20th century existential thought. It is an invitation to risk seeing, to risk being seen, to stop talking about connection and actually drop your fucking shield and connect. Because Martin Buber believed something holy, something beautiful. That God, whatever that word even means, isn't some old dude in the sky. God lives in the space between. God is the electricity that surges when one soul meets another in raw, naked, no bullshit presence. This is the episode where we burn down the fantasy of the isolated self. Where we open Buber's life like a wound, where we walk into his philosophy like a confession booth, where we admit that we're starving, not for stimulation, not for success, but for one sacred moment of being met. No filters, no edits, just I and thou.
835.
Martin Buber wasn't born into peace. He was born into rupture. Imagine a child, Vienna, 1878. A city that's more mask than face. A place where Freud is about to invent the unconscious. Where waltzes bleed into nationalism. where the old empires are cracking under their own weight but still wear powdered wigs like nothing's wrong. Vienna, this glittering corpse of Enlightenment Europe. That's the stage. That's the place where Buber enters kicking and screaming. His full name, Martin Mordecai Buber. Just let that name sit in your mouth like old wine and new blood. And here's where it starts. His mother walks out, not metaphorically, she leaves, when he's 3 years old. One day she's there, the next she's gone. No note, no long explanation, just absence, a wound that never closes. He would say later in life that he remembers standing at the window waiting for her to return. Waiting, waiting. She never did. That's the first great trauma. That's the first existential encounter. And for Buber, it doesn't fade. It burns. A child learns early that the world withdraws, that people vanish, that even your mother can become an it, a thing that's no longer present. But here's the twist, the counterweight. Because after she leaves, he doesn't disappear into neglect or poverty. He's raised by his grandfather, Solomon Buber, a respected Jewish scholar in Lviv, back then called Lemberg. This is Galicia, the borderland of empires, the compost pile of identities. Ukrainian, Polish, Austrian, Jewish, nothing is one thing. Everything is hybrid. Everything is layered and multilingual and haunted. Solomon Buber, his grandfather, was a man made of ink. He edited medieval Jewish texts like other people trimmed bonsai trees. Every morning, coffee, prayer, Hebrew manuscripts. The man was a walking footnote, and yet somehow a giant, a titan of text. So this is Martin Buber's childhood, raised by a man who lives inside scripture, in a region that doesn't believe in clean borders, after being abandoned by the one woman who was supposed to define intimacy. A paradox from day one, the sacred and the shattered, the traditional and the ruptured, the roots and the void. Dual worlds, always. Let's talk religion, because you don't get Buber's philosophy without understanding the two great Jewish rivers that flowed into him. First, you've got Hasidism, the wild, mystical, ecstatic movement that says God isn't just out there, God is here, right here, in the sweat of your dancing, in the warmth of a loaf of bread, in the breath between sentences. Hasidism says the holy isn't in the temple, it's in your kitchen, in your laughter, in the dirty, broken places that academia ignores. Then you've got Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, rationalism, ethics, scholarship. The idea that Jews should engage with the modern world, speak the languages of the empire, study Kant and Goethe and Rousseau, assimilate, polish your shoes, get a job, be respectable. These two forces, Hasidic fire and Enlightenment ice, duel inside Buber. Not one over the other, both, always both. He doesn't choose sides, he straddles the razor. In his teens, Buber is already a prodigy, reads Kant like other kids read comic books, speaks German, Hebrew, Yiddish, French, starts studying at universities, Vienna, Leipzig, Berlin. If academia were a religion, he's halfway to sainthood. He's writing on aesthetics, art history, language theory, all the heady stuff, the safe, abstract stuff. But something doesn't sit right. Because somewhere inside him, Buber still hears the Hasidic tales his grandfather whispered. Stories where rebbes talk to God like he's an old drinking buddy. Stories where spiritual truths get traded like soup recipes. There's a kind of feral beauty to it. No theology, just firelight and faith. And around this time, Buber does something wild. He drops out of university. Walks away from the academic machine. Why? Because theory starts to feel like betrayal. Because all that intellectual scaffolding, all the isms and ologies, they don't touch the pulse. They don't explain the ache. They don't meet anything. And for Buber, that's the beginning of something deeper. A new hunger, a new obsession, relationship. Not as sociology, not as psychology, but as the raw center of being. He starts translating Hasidic stories into German, but not like a scholar, like a lover, like someone crawling into the skin of the tale. He wants the modern reader to feel what the old mystics felt. Awe, trembling, joy, terror. That trembling you get when someone actually sees you. At the same time, the world's burning. It's the early 20th century. Empires are cracking. World War I is on the horizon. Europe is a pressure cooker and Buber's standing in the kitchen. Zionism is rising, Jews debating what it means to have a homeland, to have identity, to have place. And Buber again doesn't pick a side. He joins the movement, but not the way others do. Where Herzl dreamed of a Jewish state, Buber dreams of community. Not nationhood, not borders, but relationships built on respect, dialogue, encounter, even with the Arab people already living there. This is decades before people are ready to hear it. He's not naive, he's prophetic. Because for Buber, it's never about having power, it's about having presence. And all of this, his mother's disappearance, his grandfather's mysticism, his flirtation with philosophy, his delusionment with abstraction, his obsession with stories, his refusal to simplify identity, it all becomes the compost for his central idea. That we don't live in isolation, that we are not brains in jars, that we don't truly exist until we meet another. He's haunted, by the way, that never changes. His wife Paula is diagnosed with mental illness. His son Emmanuel is killed in the Holocaust. He watches friends die. He watches the dream of a peaceful Israel collapse into violence. And through all of it, he keeps writing, keeps teaching, keeps daring to believe that relation is the holy fire that keeps us human. In 1938, with Nazis crawling across Europe, Buber flees to Jerusalem. He survives, teaches, writes, but he never becomes part of the establishment. He's too slippery for that, too spiritual for the secular, too rational for the mystical, too committed to ambiguity to ever be easily classified. Martin Buber is never at home in any one place. That's the point. He lives in the in-between, raised by paradox, shaped by fracture, held together by stories. A man stitched together with thread from both sides of the soul. And maybe that's what makes him so timeless, because Buber doesn't give you answers. He doesn't give you slogans. He gives you a mirror. He says, look into the eyes of another human being and ask yourself, not what can I get from them, but can I meet them? Not use, not label, not judge, just meet. And that's a terrifying question, because once you've met someone as a thou, you can never turn them back into an it. You can never unsee them, and you can never unsee yourself. So that's Buber's beginning. Born between empires, raised between traditions, torn between intellect and spirit, abandoned by a mother, cradled by a scholar, haunted by love, lit by fire, and all of it pointing towards one staggering truth, that the most important thing you will ever do in your life is look another person in the eye and actually be there when they look back. You want to know the central nervous system of Martin Buber's life. You want the single idea that rewired the 20th century without making a sound. Here it is, simple, 2 words, a binary code for the soul. I and thou. That's it, that's the phrase. You could put it on a t-shirt, you could whisper it at a funeral, you could tattoo it inside your wrist and still not understand it. Because understanding isn't the point. You don't understand I and thou, you experience it, or you don't. Let's crack it open. In 1923, Martin Buber publishes a book called Ich und Du, in English, I and Thou. It's short, barely 100 pages, but it explodes like scripture, like a lit match flicked into a dry field of philosophical jargon. Before Buber, Western philosophy had been crawling around inside your skull. Descartes said, I think therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. The whole world reduced to a lonely guy in a chair, staring at his own thoughts like a mirror with no silver backing. Buber looked at that and said, no. No, you are not real just because you think. No, you are not real because you observe or analyze or control. You are real because you relate, not to an object, not to an idea, to another being. Buber says there are 2 primary ways of existing in the world, 2 ways of being, 2 grammar structures that shape the entire human experience. The first is I-it. This is how most of us move through the world. You see things, you name them, you use them. You navigate reality like a customer in a cosmic store. Your phone, it. Your boss, it. The barrister who makes your coffee, another it. Your partner, it if you're using them to validate your self-worth. I-it is the world of objectification. It's useful, it's necessary. It's the world of science, commerce, logic and survival. You can't live without it. But you can't be fully human inside it either, because in I-it, everything is a tool, a function, a means to an end. Even you become an it to yourself. And then there's the other way, rare and sacred. I-thou, I-you. This isn't about knowledge, this is about presence. It's when you look at someone and stop analyzing them. You stop performing, you stop needing, you just are, with them, as them. Between you both, this crackling invisible electricity, a space where ego dissolves. You don't stand outside the moment, you don't judge it, you are in it. And that, Buber says, is where God lives. Now let's slow down for a second, because when Buber says God, he's not playing by the old rules. He's not talking about a man in the clouds, or a theological argument, or a religious symbol. He's talking about encounter. He's saying that when you really meet another person, when the I meets the thou, you touch the eternal. Not metaphorically and not spiritually, literally. In that moment, the divine shows up. God isn't an object. God isn't an it. God is the eternal thou. Every true I-thou relationship is a window. You look through it and something timeless stares back. And this isn't just about people. Buber says you can have an I-thou relationship with a tree, a mountain, a work of art, even a moment. But it only happens when you stop trying to define it, dominate it, dissect it. When you stop turning life into a thesis and just let it be real. This isn't about what you relate to, it's how. Now, I-thou can't be forced. You can't schedule it. You can't manufacture it with enough yoga or therapy or relationship coaching. It just happens. And when it does, it doesn't last. It's not eternal in duration, it's eternal in depth. Because the second you try to grab it, own it, name it, it turns back into an it. You remember the moment, you tell the story, you relive the magic, but the living flame is gone. Buber says this is the tragedy and the beauty of life. We flicker between I-it and I-thou. We need both, but we are only fully alive in thou. Think about the implications. Every love affair begins as I-thou, but over time it becomes I-it. Habits form, expectations creep in. You stop seeing the other person and you see the role they play. Same with your parents, your children, your friends, even your enemies. To relate as thou is to risk everything because it means letting the other be completely themselves. Not what you want them to be, not what you fear them to be, but them. Unknown, uncontrollable, whole. And that's what makes it so rare, and that's what makes it so sacred. And here's where Buber goes nuclear. He says we don't become human alone, we become human in relation. No self without other. No I without thou. Every I you've ever been, student, lover, son, mother, stranger, was called into being by some you. That means the self isn't a static thing. It's a movement, a dance, a shifting mirror. And in every genuine encounter, you become someone new. But here's the modern curse. We live in an I-it world. Everything's data, everything's performance, everything's monetized. Even our most intimate connections become transactions. Sex becomes conquest, friendship becomes networking. Even therapy becomes a service rendered. We are terrified of I-thou because it means dropping the act. It means standing naked before another soul and saying, I am here. And maybe worse, letting them say it back. Because once you've met someone as thou, you can't unsee them, you can't reduce them, and you can't ignore their suffering. You become responsible, not out of guilt, but out of recognition. So what does Buber want from us? Not perfection, not sainthood, just presence. He's not telling you to reject the I-it world, he's telling you not to drown in it. He's saying, let your soul come up for air, let yourself meet someone, really meet them, without needing them to be useful or funny or beautiful or broken in the right way. Just meet them. And in that space, maybe God will show up. Not to save you, not to lecture you, just to be with you. Because that's the holiest thing that can ever happen, to be with. Fully, honestly, without agenda, without fear. So here's the question. Who in your life have you never really met? Who have you turned into an it because it's easier than seeing them as a soul? Who sees you as a thou and scares the fuck out of you for doing it? And maybe the hardest question of all, can you meet yourself that way? Not as a project or a failure or a brand, just as a being waiting to be seen. That's I and thou. Not an idea, not a concept, a moment. And the rest of this episode, we're going to dig into what that moment means, what it costs, and why it's the only thing that makes life worth living. Martin Buber didn't want to change your mind. He wanted to ruin your life. Let's get that straight from the start. Because once you really get Buber, once you've tasted what it means to meet someone as a thou, you can't go back. You can't go back to the fake world, the one where conversations are transactions, the one where eye contact is a threat, the one where we relate to each other like apps. What do you do? What do you offer? How do I close the window when I'm done with you? That world, the I-it world, it's not fake because it's wrong, it's fake because it's hollow. And Buber's here to blow a hole in that hollow life, with love, with presence, with the most dangerous thing in the universe, genuine relationship. Let's start with the obvious question. How do you practice I-thou in a world made of I-it? How do you meet people when your job is to manage them, when your phone buzzes every 9 seconds? When your brain's been colonized by attention economies and trauma and social scripts so tight they cut off circulation? How do you stop performing and start being? Well, the truth is that you don't do it all the time. You can't. Even Buber said that. I-it isn't evil. It's necessary. You need it to survive, to schedule things, to file taxes, to understand the difference between a red light and a green one. You can't walk into Starbucks and treat your coffee order like a spiritual ritual. You'll get arrested, or hugged, or both. But the problem is, we've made I-it the whole fucking show. We've forgotten that I-thou isn't supposed to be permanent, it's supposed to be possible. And when it happens, it changes you. It scrapes the fake off your skin. It reminds you what it feels like to be real. So how does it happen? It begins with presence. Not mindfulness, not meditation, that's the brand version. We're not talking about closing your eyes and picturing a candle on a beach while someone whispers in your ear about gratitude. We're talking about being fully there, with another person. No agenda, no mask, no plan. You sit across from someone and you don't try to fix them. You don't try to impress them. You don't shape your face into a reaction you think they'll like. You just exist, with them, in the moment, and let whatever is, be. Try it. Seriously. Next time you talk to someone, anyone, try this. Don't rehearse your responses while they're talking. Don't compare their story to yours. Don't look for the lesson or the angle or the point. Just meet them. Let them be a mystery. Let them surprise you. Let them remain other. That's what Buber means when he says thou. Not that you see someone as an angel, not that you fall in love, but that you stop reducing them. No labels, no categories, no psychological profile, no fucking trauma diagnosis, no role in your personal drama. Just a human being, whole, other, and real. And when you meet them that way, when you stop the performance, stop the manipulation, stop the framing, something breaks open. But the catch is that this kind of meeting, this kind of realness is going to cost you. Because to see someone as thou, you have to be seen that way too. And most of us, we spend our whole lives building walls to prevent that. Because what if they see how messy we are, how contradictory, how unfinished, how flawed? Buber's challenge isn't just see others, it's let yourself be seen, fully flawed and exposed. That's why I call it the dangerous art of real relating. Because the moment you drop your armor, your scripts and your strategy, you open yourself to wounding. You let another person into the holy of holies, the raw, quivering, bleeding, yearning center of who you are, and they could reject you. They could misunderstand you. They could disappear. They could betray you, like Buber's mother did, like people do. And still, he believed it was worth it. Because without that risk, without that meeting, you are just a shadow pretending to be alive. And that something is sacred. Let's talk about relationships now. Not just the deep ones, all of them. You can practice I-thou in a moment with a stranger, a passing glance, a shared silence on a park bench. Not romantic, not mystical, just real. But in long-term relationships, partners, parents, children, friends, the danger gets bigger. Because those relationships are the most likely to collapse into I-it, into routines and expectations, into assumptions. You stop seeing the other person, you start seeing your version of them. Your story, your memory, your disappointment, your hope. And Buber says that that's the slow death of relationship. To bring it back to life, you have to risk re-seeing them every day. Let them become new again, let them change, let yourself change. You don't find the thou once. You keep choosing it, not with control and not with force, but with presence, over and over again. And therapy, Buber's fingerprints are all over modern therapy, even if they don't say his name. Carl Rogers, the godfather of person-centered therapy, literally built his whole approach around Buber's ideas. Unconditional positive regard, that's just thou in a lab coat. The healing doesn't come from interpretation or technique, it comes from being witnessed. When someone sits across from you and they don't try to fix you, label you or correct you, they just meet you. That's when the real work happens. That's when the mask starts to slip, when you start to believe, maybe for the first time, that you are not a problem to be solved. You're a being to be met. And in politics, Buber lived this stuff. He applied it to conflict, to nationalism, to Zionism, to the Israeli-Palestinian nightmare. He said we must relate to the other as thou or we will destroy each other. He didn't believe in utopia, he believed in dialogue, face to face, heart to heart, even when it's impossible, especially then. Because to Buber, peace doesn't start with agreements, it starts with recognition. You look at your enemy and you see a soul, not a statistic, not a slogan, not a threat, a thou. So here's where we land. Buber in practice isn't a philosophy, it's a fire. It burns your pretenses, it burns your cynicism, it burns everything that's false, and it leaves you with this, a choice, every day in every interaction. Do I show up? Do I perform? Or do I meet? It won't be clean, it won't be safe, and it won't always be returned, but it will be real. And in a world full of illusions, that is the most revolutionary act there is. So next time someone speaks to you, pause, look up, let the mask drop, and remember Martin Mordecai Buber whispering in your ear, all real living is meeting. The problem with most philosophy is that it dies, it fossilizes. You read it once in college and you've forgotten it by lunch. But Martin Buber is different. He doesn't die in the textbook, he rises out of it, bleeding and awake, walks straight into your apartment and asks you why you're afraid to look your partner in the eyes anymore. This segment isn't a history lesson, it's an autopsy. We are slicing open the modern world and seeing how Buber's ideas pulse through the corpse, if you know where to look, and I promise, they're everywhere. Let's start with the screen. The one you're probably holding right now. That glowing rectangle full of curated selves, filtered faces, and dopamine drip notifications. Your device, your feed, your very own I-it machine. Everything we do online is I-it. Swipe, click, scroll, judge, buy, discard. People become profiles, emotions become emojis, presence becomes content. You don't meet anyone online, you meet representations, avatars of avatars. Even when you're connecting, you're not. You're narrating, you're branding. You're constructing a version of yourself for others to consume like snack food. And Buber saw it coming. He didn't know about TikTok, but he knew the spiritual cost of performance. He knew the temptation to turn life into a series of consumable interactions. Moments without meaning, speech without encounter. We are drowning in I-it, and we are calling it progress. Ghosting is the new violence. You know what I'm talking about. That sick, numb silence when someone stops replying. The digital death of a connection. Not with a bang, but with a blank screen. This isn't just rude, this is metaphysical violence. Because when someone ghosts you, they're saying, you were never a thou, you were always an it. A placeholder, a convenience, a distraction I can exit like a tab on my browser. And when you're ghosted enough times, you start to do it to yourself. You stop showing up fully. You preempt rejection by never being real. You become a ghost in your own skin. Buber wouldn't call this sad, he'd call it dehumanizing. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's reduction. Turning someone into less than they are, turning yourself into a manageable version. Safe, silent, not too much. In the I-it world, that's what survival looks like. In the I-thou world, it's called spiritual suicide. AI can mimic you, but it can't meet you. You can train a language model to say all the right things, empathy scripts, active listening, mimicked rapport, but you will never experience I-thou with a chatbot, not with your therapist app, not with a customer service AI that pretends to give a fuck. Because no matter how real it sounds, it's missing one thing: presence. There's no soul on the other end, no risk, no you behind the mask. And Buber would say, without presence, you're not in a relationship, you're in an interaction. Think about that the next time you're tempted to replace a conversation with a thread. Think about that the next time you let your phone comfort you instead of a human being. Machines are brilliant at I-it, but they can't do thou, because thou isn't about information, it's about being with. And no software update can teach that. Then we have therapy, trauma, and the healing encounter. Here's where Buber's legacy lives loudest. Not in synagogues or seminaries, but in therapy rooms. He believed that healing happens in the meeting, not in advice or analysis, but in a sacred encounter between two people where one says, "I see you," and the other believes it, maybe for the first time. When you walk into a therapist's office thinking you're there to get fixed, what you're really doing is asking, "Will you meet me?" Buber said the core human need isn't success or safety, it's recognition. To be met, not as a case file or a diagnosis or a job title, but as a whole being, complex, messy, and alive. When therapists talk about holding space, when they talk about co-regulation, when they talk about the real relationship, they're speaking Buber's language. They just don't always know it. Next, we have love in the age of performance. Relationships today are brutal because we are not just loving each other, we are performing at each other. Swipe culture, status updates, personal brands. Every date is an audition, every relationship is a project. Even love becomes content. But I-thou, that is where the mask slips. That's where you show up as yourself without edits. That's where you let your partner be more than your fantasy. Buber's love isn't sexy, not about butterflies, it's about presence over time. It's about choosing again and again to see the person in front of you, not the version of them you built when you were lonely and hopeful. Love for Buber is a discipline of encounter. It's spiritual warfare against reduction. It's saying, "I won't use you, I'll meet you, even when it's hard," especially then. Then there's social justice, conflict, and the politics of recognition. Buber wasn't naive. He didn't think encounter would fix everything, but he did believe that nothing gets better without it. He applied his whole philosophy to politics, to Zionism, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He said, if we don't meet the enemy as thou, we will destroy each other as its. And guess what? He was right. We live in a culture of ideological warfare, left versus right, us versus them. No one's trying to understand, we're all just trying to win. Buber would say victory without encounter is hollow. Peace without recognition is fake. You don't need to agree with someone to meet them, you just need to see them. Not as a symbol, not as a threat, but as a whole complicated thou. And in that space, however small, change becomes possible. Last one, the hardest one, maybe the only one that matters. Have you met yourself yet? Not as a collection of goals, not as a brand, not as a list of traumas you can recite on cue. Have you met the you beneath all of that? Because the thing is that you can't meet anyone as thou until you stop treating yourself as it. You can't love if you're performing. You can't be present if you're hiding. You can't encounter anyone if you've ghosted your own being. Buber's challenge isn't just about how you treat others, it is about how deeply you're willing to exist. Are you ready to show up, even without a script, even when you're afraid, and even when you don't know what happens next? That's where the fire lives. It's where the soul starts to speak. See, Buber doesn't belong to the past. He belongs to the moment when your phone battery dies and you're forced to sit with another person and actually be there. He belongs to the moment a child looks up to you and you don't look away. He belongs to the silence between the noise, when presence breaks through the performance and something eternal glows between two ordinary human beings. That is the real revolution. Not theory, not theology, meeting. Even prophets have blind spots. Even mystics miss the mark. Even the most sacred philosophy needs to be cracked open and questioned, not out of malice, but out of love. Martin Buber was not a god. He wasn't even always right, but he was real, and realness means contradiction. So in this segment, we look at the limits, the critiques, the places where Buber's philosophy bends or breaks or just fails to go far enough. Not to tear him down, but to meet him as he was. A human being trying to translate the sacred into a language the world could understand. And sometimes he just didn't get it all the way there. The first critique is that he was too romantic and too impractical. Some people look at the I and thou and say this is beautiful but impossible. They say Buber was a romantic, not in the flowers and love letters way, in a tragic way. The I want to believe but the world doesn't work like that way. His vision of human encounter, pure presence, no manipulation, no agenda, sounds divine. It is divine, but how do you live like that when you've got 3 jobs, a mortgage, a trauma history and 1,000 unread emails? Critics argue that Buber's vision asks too much, that it sets the bar for relationships so high it becomes another form of failure, another unreachable ideal. What about conflict? What about mental illness? What about people who can't meet you as a thou, no matter how present you try to be? There are no easy answers in Buber's work, because Buber didn't write about systems, he wrote about moments, tiny flashes of realness inside the fake. But still the critique stands. Presence takes time, and most of us are suffocating in the economy of hurry. You can't build a society on sacred encounters when capitalism demands constant efficiency. You can't live in I-thou when everything around you runs on I-it. Unless you're a monk or a ghost. The second critique, what about structures? Here's where the philosophers come in, the ones who loved Buber's spirit but couldn't ignore the gaps. Thinkers like Immanuel Levinas looked at Buber and said, beautiful idea, but not enough. Because Buber talks about encounter, the sacred meeting of two beings, but he doesn't always talk about power. He doesn't go deep on oppression. He doesn't unpack what happens where I and thou meet, but one of them has all the weapons. Levinas argued that ethics begins before encounter, that responsibility to the other doesn't depend on feeling something spiritual. It's already there, already owed. You don't need to feel present to treat someone as sacred. You just need to stop crushing them. Buber's silence on systemic injustice, on racism, on class, on patriarchy makes some critics nervous. Because if you make everything about the personal encounter, you can ignore the conditions that make encounter impossible for millions. It is hard to meet someone as thou when they are starving or incarcerated or being bombed to fuck. Buber doesn't go there, not fully, and maybe that's the biggest blind spot of all. The third critique is the problem of evil. So we're going to take it a little further, a little darker in this section. Buber believed that God lives in the space between us, in the sacred relation, in presence, in love. But what happens when that space is filled with hate, with abuse, with cruelty? Can you I-thou a monster? Now, some people have used Buber's philosophy to argue for radical empathy with abusers, to say we must always meet the other as sacred even when they dehumanize us. And that gets dangerous. Because Buber didn't give us a lot of tools for boundaries, for no, for protecting the self from relationships that don't just fail but destroy us. He believed in redemption, but not everyone wants to be redeemed. Not every encounter is holy. Some are hell. Buber himself lived through the Holocaust. His son was murdered by the Nazis, and yet, even after all that, he kept preaching dialogue. Some admire that, others say that's spiritual bypassing. At what point does forgiveness become complicity? And Buber never answered that question, not fully. The fourth critique is the elusiveness of thou. This is the existential critique. Even if you do manage to meet someone as a thou, what then? It never lasts. That is the heartbreak built into Buber's vision. I-thou is always fleeting. You can't hold it, you can't live inside it, and you can't possess it. You touch it and it's gone. back into it, into routine, into roles. Critics say this makes Buber's vision too ephemeral, too hard to practice, and too easy to romanticize. How do you build a relationship on something so transient? How do you keep choosing I-thou when it hurts to lose it every time? This isn't just a practical problem, it becomes spiritual grief. Buber doesn't promise transcendence, he promises flickers, moments, glimpses of God out of the corner of your eye. It's beautiful and it's holy, but it's also sad. The final critique is that Buber was human, if that can be a critique. Now, there are contradictions in the man himself, as I'm sure there are contradictions in all of us. He preached encounter, but sometimes struggled to live it. He spoke about mutuality, but often took the role of the spiritual authority in his own dialogues. He was deeply involved in politics, but his vision of peace was sometimes too idealistic to be actionable. He spoke of God as the eternal thou, but his actual theology was deliberately vague, almost evasive. Some scholars argued he avoided the messier questions like sin and anger, and the full complexity of being human in a body that breaks and a world that bleeds. And yet, maybe that's the point. Maybe the fact that Buber didn't resolve all of this is what makes him matter. He didn't give us answers, he gave us a space to show up, to speak, to fail, to try again. He didn't say, here's the truth. He said, meet me and maybe we'll find something true together. So those are the limits, the cracks. Martin Buber wasn't perfect, his vision wasn't complete, but maybe it wasn't supposed to be. Maybe I and Now isn't a system, perhaps it's a beginning. An invitation to show up with all your doubts, your critiques, your anger and your love, and just be real with another human being. Because that's the only way that anything ever changes. This isn't the kind of philosophy you memorize, it's the kind that memorizes you. Martin Buber never gave us a map, he gave us a moment, and the courage to live inside it. You don't walk away from I and Thou with a framework or a 5-step plan, you walk away holding something fragile. A glimpse, a feeling, a memory of the time someone really looked at you. The time you really looked back. And the silence that bloomed between those gazes like a cathedral no one had to build. That's what Buber gave us, not a philosophy, but a possibility. All real living is meeting. You've heard me say it a dozen times in this episode, and you've heard Buber say it in every word he wrote. But now I want you to feel it. I want you to think about someone who's become an it in your life. A partner, a parent, a friend, or a co-worker. Someone you've turned into a role, a function, a routine. Ask yourself, when was the last time I saw them? Not as a personality, not as a tool, as a thou. And deeper than that, when was the last time you were seen? When was the last time you didn't have to perform, didn't have to fix yourself, didn't have to be impressive or witty or strong? When was the last time someone met you exactly as you were, and you let them? That's the ache at the center of Buber's work, not loneliness, unmetness. The way we brush past each other, ghost each other, reduce each other until we're not even people anymore. We are just projections and roles and noise. But it doesn't have to stay that way. You can meet someone today, right now. You don't need a temple and you don't need a therapist, you just need to show up with presence and breath and nothing to prove. You don't even need to say anything. Just look. Look at the person across from you. Let your eyes rest. Let the moment stretch. Don't flinch. Don't smile out of habit. Don't reach for the next thing to say. Just be. And in that terrifying pause, you might feel it. The holy thrum. The gentle rupture. That sacred silence that says, I see you and I am here. That's not performance and it's not ideology. That's reality. The kind we've forgotten how to touch. This episode, it wasn't just about a man, it was about a possibility buried under the rubble of your routines. You don't have to fix your life, you don't have to find the perfect belief system, you don't have to become enlightened. You just have to stop and meet the person in front of you. Even if it's just for a second, even if they don't notice, even if you don't know what to say. Because the truth is that the world doesn't need more productivity, doesn't need more hacks, and it certainly doesn't need more certainty. The world needs more people willing to show up, fully unarmed and unscripted. That's what Buber taught, and that's what he lived. A life of risky, radical relation. And here's the final thing I'll leave you with. You don't have to go looking for God. You don't have to define God. You don't even have to believe in God. Just try to meet someone. Try to meet them like they're the only thing in the universe that matters. Because in that moment, they are. And whether you call it love or grace or the eternal Tao, you will feel something shift. A quiet little resurrection. The sacred lives in the ordinary. It always has. In a glance, in a pause, in the space between two breaths. Buber wasn't trying to get you to heaven. He was trying to get you here, right now, with whoever you're with, even if that's just yourself. Thank you for joining me on this little philosophical expedition today. You know that I deeply appreciate your presence and your attention. And if you found anything in this episode useful, or you think that someone else might find it interesting as well, then please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Here comes that hideous marketing bullshit, because we have to do this, unfortunately. But we are on social media, as much as I loathe those platforms. You can find us on Instagram, on X, and on TikTok with the handle @TheObservingEye. We're on YouTube, where you can go and watch our videos, which is youtube.com/@TheObservingEye. And we've also got a beautiful website on Substack, which is theobservingeye.com. So all of those platforms, you can go and chat to us and engage and comment and all of the usual things that you can do with these social spaces. I've also got an email, which I'm not entirely sure is a good idea, but you can email me at david@theobservingeye.com with your questions or suggestions or anything you want to get off your chest about philosophy. Not therapy, I can't be your therapist, but I'm happy to field philosophical questions and existential horrors. That's all good. And I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, which is normally within a day or so. Thanks everybody, take care, much love, and I'll catch you soon.